Morning, Northview. How are you doing this morning? It is so good to see you. I want to say hello to everybody who's connecting up with us online. We're grateful that you could join us today, too. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 20 today, at least as a starting place. So if you have a Bible with you or a Bible app on your phone, that's where we're going to begin today. We've been going through, if you're a guest with us or one of the first times here in a while, this is a series based on the Ten Commandments. And we've been walking our way through them over the last several weeks, and we're going to make our way today to commandment number 7. And I'm excited to unpack that with you. It's all kind of centered around this great gift that God has given us. And, gifts, when they're given, the intent when a gift is given is to be enjoyed. If I give you a gift, it's to enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it. A good gift is to be enjoyed. A great gift is to be not only enjoyed, but also protected. Like, to enjoy it, you have to kind of protect it, right? You give somebody a gift card, it's like, hey, just go enjoy a dinner on us. That'd be great. But like a great gift. Like I remember when my parents surprised me and I came home one day unannounced. They just had a new bike sitting in my bedroom. And I was like, what is this? And they were like, it's for you. It's for you. We saw your long legs were outgrowing the one you had. So here's a new mountain bike and just enjoy it. And I was like blown away. So I'm riding it around the block. And of course, it's the new bike on the block and everybody's looking at it and checking out that all black Huffy. I mean, it was legit. It was legit. And of course, some of my buddies were like, hey, let me ride it. And I'm like, no, this is mine. This is like, not only I'm enjoying it, I am protecting it. I don't want anybody else on this thing because I don't want you to wreck it, right? When I was 16, my dad got a new truck, bright red Chevy. I mean, it was just beautiful. I was driving a 1985 Chevy Nova. Okay, it was a box. It was a box. There was an era where Novas were cool. This was not the era. They were done. It was at the end of a life cycle. They looked like a really poor version of a Toyota Corolla or something. I mean, it was awful. And so he pulls in with the new car, the new truck, and I'm like, can I drive it? And he's going, nope, it's mine. Right? I gifted it to myself, and I want to protect it. Now, ultimately, he was afraid that I would wreck it. That would prove to be true. I would get it all scratched up, and it wouldn't be very long. So he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. It was a great thing, and he wanted to protect it. We're going to be talking about a great gift today that God has given us and the need to protect it. We're going to be talking about marriage as it connects to the seventh commandment. We're going to talk about sex as it connects to the seventh commandment. And this is a conversation that my goal today is to be, as Jesus would have been, full of grace and truth. Not one or the other, but both. Full of grace, full of truth as we have this conversation. Last week I had a funny dialogue with somebody after church a few days later, and they said, boy, Pastor, I didn't know how you were going to, fill 30 minutes worth of time on the commandment that we did last week. Do not murder. As he said, it's pretty well said right there, just in a few words. Like, I didn't think you'd be able to fill 30 minutes, but there you go. You proved me wrong. You proved me wrong. You were able to do it. And I said, wait till this week. Wait till this week. And he goes, what? I said, you know what commandment is next? And he said, no. I said, do not commit adultery. And he goes, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we're gonna talk about this, but we're gonna really shape this and frame this around the idea of it's a negatively stated commandment, but the heart of what is being said here is connected to something incredibly positive. A gift that God has given. I'll tell you this, to be, all jokes aside, the church really has to be in this conversation. We have to enter the war zone to preserve and protect one of the most precious gifts and one of the most precious relationships God has created. Each year in our country, 200,000 marriages end before year 2. And statistics say about a quarter of all marriages experience infidelity of some kind. And I will tell you from my own experience in doing ministry for 20 plus years, if I was to try to sort through in my mind and say, what have been some of the hardest, most difficult, most painful processes that I've ever walked through with people trying to kind of navigate through landmines in life, 90%, if I was to estimate, 90% of the hardest stuff has been connected to marriage and sex and adultery. It's just the reality that is there. And I guess in some ways, while I'm maybe like you going, I just wish it wasn't like that, we shouldn't be as surprised as we maybe are. If it is a great gift, if it is something that God has given us to be enjoyed, shouldn't we appreciate or expect that there's going to be an attack in that area by our adversary, by the devil? He's going to do anything and everything he can. If this is something that God has given us for good, well, he's going to go out of his way to do anything he possibly can to distort and disrupt and mess up something that God has given us. The seventh commandment is stated in just a handful of words. Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. You shall not commit adultery. So like we've seen with murder and some other commands, God sets a really hard line, a boundary. And he says, don't go past this. Don't go past this. As I said before, it's stated in the negative, but the implication is actually born out of something very, very positive. The heart of the commandment is essentially this, that marriage and sex are great gifts. That's the starting point. That's the starting point for this conversation, to acknowledge that our sexuality is a gift from God. It was his idea in the first place. All you have to do to be reminded of that is, turn in your Bible to Song of Solomon. I remember as a probably fifth grader, discovering that book in my Bible. And I was always looking over my shoulder, waiting for mom and dad, what are you reading, that trash? Let me take that away from you, right? But actually, it's actually a quite beautiful picture of intimacy between a husband and a wife. Inside of that relationship, God designed that experience to be far more than we could have ever imagined. Sex inside of God's boundaries, husband and a wife, it is designed not only to be procreational, but also recreational and relational. The command, I guess, from the positive could be stated instead of do not commit adultery, thou shalt not commit adultery, could be thou shalt have great sex. I mean, that's really the heart of this commandment. That's really the heart of this commandment. What is prohibited by this commandment? Any sexual act outside the confines of a marriage between a man and a woman. There's no loopholes, there's no exceptions. That's God's definition of what this looks like. And this prohibition is a protection. And that's one of the first pieces to kind of take this command into our hearts, is to realize anytime God sets a boundary, it's a blessing, not a burden to obey. Now, I know this is sometimes hard in our relationship with God, but if you're a parent, you understand you do this with your kids all the time. And you set boundaries, and you set them for their benefit. Like, sometimes you're being a bad guy or perceived as a bad guy, but I have to set some boundaries because you're not going to be able in moments to think for yourself or to do the right thing. So I'm going to put some boundaries for your own protection. It's designed to protect the sanctity of marriage. That's not something that's protected by and large in the world that we live in and by the society that we see, by the movies we watch, the TV shows that we watch. Mostly they would show that's just the way passionate people are. And when you're passionate about someone, you just let that go wherever it wants to take you. And God spoke very plainly, very clearly, very briefly in this commandment. As I've said in weeks previous, we should pay attention to what he said in any of these commandments because he only had 10 of them. Like he reduced the heart of what he wanted his people to embrace about life with each other and him into just 10 things. So every one of them is super, super important, super tied to the heart of God. The world around us would say, marriage, whatever. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, no big deal. But God says this is very, very close to my heart, and this is one of the greatest gifts that I have to give you. And when you step out of, with sexuality, out of my prescribed boundaries, you experience great pain. Now, Moses didn't go into that detail with us in Exodus chapter 20, but as you read through other parts of the Bible, you'll see that happen. Like when you get to one of the more prominent figures in the Old Testament, King David, and you see his son Solomon. I mean, you'll see a family in that situation generationally struggling in this area. And having experiences that for a moment sounded like a good idea, but only created great, great pain. This family was brought low by adultery. You can read Psalm 51 or Psalm 32, and you can see a man, David, who is crying out to God to have mercy on him because he's been caught, he's been revealed, his sin has been revealed, and he knows what he's done is wrong, and he cries out for grace from God. He has a son, Solomon. Solomon, you might think, would learn from dad's lessons. No, he poured gas on that fire. And he experienced, on a level that David would blush at, a violation of this commandment. So that when he had a son, he could look back at his experience and his dad's experience and say, oh boy, all right, I hope you do this differently than we have. And you read the book of Proverbs, and you'll see that of all the topics that Solomon covers as he's addressing his son, there's almost nothing that he seems to be more passionate about or references more frequently than this. So he'll say like this to his son in Proverbs chapter 5. Now, my sons, listen to me. Never stray from what I'm about to say. This is like dad going, eyes, right here, right here, right here. Are you with me? Listen, listen. Don't go near the door of her house. If you do, you will lose your honor. You will lose to merciless people all you've achieved. Strangers will consume your wealth, and someone else will enjoy the fruit of your labor. In the end, you will groan in anguish. When disease consumes your body, you will say, how I hated discipline. If only I had not ignored all the warnings. Why didn't I listen to my teachers? Why didn't I pay attention to my instructors? I've come to the utter brink of ruin, and now I must face public disgrace. Drink water from your own well. Share love with only your wife. Why spill the water of your springs in the streets, having sex with anyone? You should reserve it for yourselves. Never share it with strangers. Solomon, in this moment with his sons, is saying, don't do what I did. Listen to me. Listen to me. Don't trade a moment of sexual intensity for a lifetime of sexual intimacy. Don't throw that away. It will feel in a moment, it'll look in a moment like it's the right path, and it will create heartache after heartache after heartache. Solomon's telling his son, don't learn this lesson the hard way like I did. Don't learn the lesson the hard way like your grandpa did. It's a sobering application when we start to think about it. And as we watch the rest of the story of Scripture kind of unfold, we see others who've struggled with this. And so this boundary becomes very, very hard and fast. It's like, here we go. Okay, no adultery. Inside of marriage, there we go. But then we get to the New Testament and we see Jesus speak into this subject, and he has even more to say than what we're prepared to probably embrace, because he pushes this conversation not just to the absolute edges of the boundary, but like we saw last week with murder, where he said, you've heard it was said in the Old Testament, do not murder. But I tell you that if you get angry with someone and lash out in anger at someone, you're guilty. Similarly, he says something here with adultery in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. He says, you've heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for the whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Jesus raises the bar on this conversation. And he moves this conversation from the belt level to the eye level. And he says adultery starts with eyes. It eyes. By the way, let me just say this by the way of disclaimer. The self-mutilation part in that verse we just read, that is hyperbole. That is hyperbole. About cutting off your hand. I do not want to have another doctor call me and say, what did you preach on Sunday? True story, don't ask. Don't ask. It's hyperbole. What does it mean? It means that no one escapes. No one escapes the reach of this commandment. No one fully is outside of temptation in this area. It means that adultery happens long before two bodies ever touch. It means it starts in the eyes. The Greek word that he uses is the word blepon. Blepon means to look at and to dwell, a continued action, allowing the thought to flourish. For many of us, guys especially, that's where things start. I remember years ago, I was in a gas station, and my wife was in the car. I was in the gas station. I was waiting to buy something at the counter, and the woman who was behind the counter was not paying attention, didn't know I was there. She was writing something down on the counter behind me, so booty sticking out right at me as I'm at the counter. And it took a little while for her to figure out that I was there. And in my boredom, I guess, my eyes did what sometimes eyes do. Without being guarded, they went down, up, and then all of a sudden, I remembered my wife was in the parking lot, and they went over. And we made eye contact, and she went like this. And I was like, what just happened? Like, that was like almost non-controllable. Like, what just happened? So it was like eyes down, up, over, head down. Oh, gosh. Oh, gosh. But that is a microcosm of what this journey looks like. It's like the eyes give permission to dwell, and once permission to dwell is given, behaviors start to change. Women, it's not exclusively a men thing. This is true of women as well. Sometimes for women, lust is less about the visual and is much more for them about wanting to be desired sexually or emotionally. And those thoughts take way, and the mind begins to take itself into a place that God would not have us go. So I guess one of the most practical things we could do here with the time that we have left is, now that we've understood that this is a big deal to God, it's a great gift, it needs to be not just enjoyed but protected, and that the application and the temptations that are out there are quite broad for all of us here, let me just get real practical with some of the most overarching biblical advice that I could give you on how to avoid having this happen in your life. Step number one, or advice number one, would be this: visualize the consequences if you do. Take a good look down the road before you would proceed. Don't think that you're the exception, or don't think that you would be able to dodge any of these repercussions. Just don't, because the reality is, and this is what happens in these moments, was we often just don't see where the road could go. Proverbs 6 verse 27 says, "Can a man scoop a flame into his lap and not have his clothes catch fire? Can he walk on hot coals and not blister his feet? So it is with a man who sleeps with another man's wife. He embraces her and will not go unpunished." It's a matter of focus. In a moment, we lose focus of the long direction, the long view of where a decision could take us. For those of you who are married or maybe wanting to be married, know this about the vows that we take: that forsaking all others includes eyes, emotions, actions. It's all encompassing every day. So visualize the consequences before you walk down a road. Know what this could lead to. Secondly, do whatever it takes to avoid the risks. Do whatever it takes. Most of us overestimate our strength, specifically in this area. We overestimate our strength. That'll never happen to me. I'm able to keep this under wraps, or I'm able to keep this under control. It's not going to happen to me. But you're not as strong as you think you are. Sometimes there are boundaries within the boundaries that can help you stay away from moments or situations where temptation might creep in. You may have been familiar with or have heard of someone refer to the Billy Graham rule. The Billy Graham rule. And it kind of basically is that the Billy Graham made a commitment to not be in a car or in an office or behind a closed door or in any kind of private place with someone of the opposite sex. Recently, that's kind of come under fire. Mike Pence had a commitment to that, so people thought it was so stodgy and outdated and whatever. And I've always laughed at that criticism because I thought, there's really only one person that actually, whose opinion on this whole matter actually is significant, and that's his wife. I'm sure she really appreciates it. I'm sure she's really okay with it. I'm sure she's really good with knowing that that's a commitment her wife had known. But the Billy Graham rule, interestingly enough, comes out of a conversation that he had with a few of the guys that he was traveling with in the late 40s And specifically in Modesto, California, he and a group of guys wrote down what's become known as the Modesto Manifesto of here's how we're going to keep doing this itinerant evangelist ministry and keep our heart right with God and keep our integrity. These are the protections that we're going to put. These are the steps that we're going to take to make sure this wouldn't happen. And there was really 4 pieces to it. The first one had to do with money. Money. They made a commitment that because we're traveling and we're going to be doing free will offerings, and that's how we're going to make the money that we make, and that's how we're going to do our ministry and travel, there's a temptation to over-dramatize that moment. There's a temptation to make more of that than what would be appropriate, and also for accountability's sake. And they said, we're not going to do that. We're going to make a commitment that we will make financial appeals, but we will not over-dramatize it for the sake of manipulating people. And we will have transparent financial dealings. There was also a commitment. The second part had to do with local churches. And they said, we are not going to compete against with the ministry that we do on a Friday night or a Tuesday night or a Saturday night. We are not competing with local churches or setting ourselves up as a better than option to a local church. We will partner with local churches and do our best to take those who come to one of our gatherings and funnel them to a local church so that what God moves in their heart at the event could then grow from there. The third part had to do with publicity. It was a commitment to take a very honest look at the press relationship that they were developing. And they made a commitment to say, we will not exaggerate the size of our crowds or the amount of people that responded to Christ. If 500 people were there, we won't say 1,000 were there. If it's 10,000 people that we wished were there, but it was really 2,000, we will say 2,000 were there. We will be honest in reporting everything that happens. And then the fourth piece had to do with sexual improprieties. They said, we will make a commitment that none of us will travel alone with any women by ourselves that are not our wives, so that no hint of sexual immorality could be put in place. Those boundaries helped propel and guide and protect not only Billy Graham's marriage, but also his ministry for years and years and years. And so some may come and look at that and say, oh, he just wasn't very strong. No, he was very wise because he knew where the temptations would be, and he put safeguards in place to make sure that those didn't happen. For you and I, there are similar approaches that we might be able to take in life. There may be other boundaries that we could build, whether it's to learn to bounce our eyes, whether it's to stop comparing, whether it's to guard the media that we take in, or to never talk negatively about our spouse to someone of the opposite sex, to learn to run away when temptation is flaring up and you feel like you might be in trouble, to understand that idleness is not helpful in the battle for purity. King David's a great example of this. You go back and you rewind the tape on his story, and you find out what was the context of his affair with Bathsheba. The very opening verse of that story starts out like this. In the springtime, when kings go out to war, David was at home. Instead of doing what God had put on him as a purpose, he stayed back while everybody else went. Kings would normally go out. But in his idle time, with nothing to do, he was consumed by temptation. Third piece of advice that I would give you is this. Spend whatever it costs to invest in your marriage. Spend whatever it costs. Grass grows green where it's watered, not just over at the other field. So take care of what you have, and it will flourish. It will flourish. You need to ask yourself, where do I need to invest to make this happen? Falling in love is easy. Staying in love is hard. Falling in love takes a pulse. Staying in love takes a plan. And a lot of couples don't plan to fail. There's just no plan. There's no strategy. There's no intentionality. There's no investment in the marriage. So whether that's scheduling intentional time for a date, for a getaway, even for sex, Whether it's taking time to pray together or to read a marriage book together or to surround yourself with strong marriages who have been there, done that, and can help you grow in your relationship. Whether it's counseling, sometimes when it comes to counseling or any of these steps for that matter, that require time and money. The pushback that I've received from people, I've sat down with couples who are like, we want help, we need to grow here, we got a problem, we got a crisis. Whenever we start to move into this part of the conversation about investing in their own marriage, I hear this often. It's just so expensive. It just costs so much. And I just, almost every time, just about lose my lid when we have this conversation. Because I'm like, I know for a fact you're spending through the roof on travel sports. I know you got the kids in ballet. I know you're taking vacations. I know we have the resources, time and money. We are choosing to divert them other places instead of where God and one of his great gifts are located. Spending money on a babysitter or marriage counseling or a weekend getaway, we say that's selfish and unnecessary. No, it's not. No, it's not. It might be the most practical thing you've ever done for your marriage. Single people, let me just kind of hang on for a second. You might be going, I've been sitting here all day like going, okay, just got to get through this one. Just got to get through this one. No, this connects. For one, because we know that what Jesus said about lust targets all of us. But also to understand some of us who are in that position right now may someday be married. And promises are no substitute for preparation. Anybody can say I do. But it takes few are prepared for the actual journey. So look at yourself and say, where do I need to grow? Where do I need to become more like Christ? Because that's who someone that I would want to marry would be looking for in me. Am I the person that someone I am looking for is looking for? This starts by honoring your vows before you ever say them to somebody. So know that if you are, right now, if you're sleeping with somebody who's not your spouse, you're communicating, even if you're not married. You might go, I'm not married, I'm not committing adultery. No, you are. And here's what it's communicating. One, your relationship with God is not the priority relationship in your life. And number two, you're communicating to them that you're the person, the kind of person who would sleep with somebody when they're not married to. And you go, that's what you're doing. That's what's going on here. And so don't think that just by saying vows later changes that. It doesn't. What happens when you go on business trips or when she goes on business trips and things come up? There's a reason why statistics kind of play themselves out in this area where 60% of couples that are living together before they're married are doing so despite the stats saying it's more harmful than helpful. Divorce rate 50% higher than couples that don't. And if you live with two people before you're married, the chances are almost zero that first marriage is going to make it. Don't believe that you're going to be the exception, but understand there are things that you can do right now to live in a different way. And I understand, too, that we hear this in very different ways, depending on what stage of life that we're on. But I think there's probably some pretty universal categories that each of us fits in this conversation. One would be the tempted. And I think we've highlighted that that's all of us. The second one would be the wayward. Those who right now know this is not God's will for my life, but this is what I'm living. Third would be the brokenhearted. Brokenhearted over either my choices or my spouse's. And that's where I want to land on this last piece of advice. Because no matter where you are, whether tempted, wayward, or brokenhearted, this truth presents itself. You've got to reject the notion that your life or your relationships are beyond redemption. Maybe one of the most practical things that you could do is to grab hold of that reality and say, that's what I needed to hear. Because some of us will look backwards at what has happened up to this moment and go, man, I'm out. Or I've messed this up. I've screwed this up. Where do I go? You go to a God who specializes in grace and redemption and reversing impossible situations. There are stories that I could share. There are people who have gone through these journeys that come out on the other side. This does not have to be the end of a relationship. This does not have to be the end of a marriage. People can grow. People can change. No person and no marriage is outside of God's redemptive power. We know this because we've seen it happen with our own eyes. And we also know it because God's already demonstrated in history that he's done something harder than reconcile two people after infidelity. What I mean is, he raised Jesus from the dead. And as hard as it may be to reconcile two people after infidelity, it's infinitely harder to raise a dead person. Like if I was to have you guys all come and look at two rooms, and one room is a couple with tears coming down their face, puffy, one's upset, one's broken in different ways. They're just devastated by the news that's just been revealed. And then I take you over to the other room and there's a dead person in it. And I said, which one is going to be harder to remedy and redeem? The couple or the dead guy? I'm not saying reconciliation is easy, but we would all agree that it's easier than raising someone back to life. God has already done that. He has already proven he has the power to do that. And he's used that resurrection power to resurrect relationships, marriages, to come back from the brink. His grace is here. It's available. When we mess this up, we do what David did in Psalm 51. We repent and we say, create in me a pure heart, God. Renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to redeem me. God never gives up. He's always working for the good. So as we come to this moment of response, I just want to invite you to understand that part of responding to Jesus as Lord and Savior is inviting him into this area of our lives and allowing him to work out his lordship even through our marriages and our sexuality. And allowing that tension that exists there to be a place where he grows us and shapes us, where he takes those temptations and those struggles and those failures and he applies his great grace to us to point us, though, ultimately in a greater direction. So in this moment, some of you, maybe this is a moment of surrender. To say, no more. This is time to change. It's over now. This is an area that will now be yielded to God. For others, maybe it's to understand that instead of looking backwards at what had happened and always have that in the back of your head, like, I just wish I could have taken it out of my story, to understand God's grace has redeemed you and put you in a place now where that is no longer haunting you because he has forgiven. Marriages have been redeemed and restored. This conversation, both truth and grace have to be managed, have to be applied, have to be embraced. That's the nature of life with Jesus. He will speak to us plainly and clearly. He will invite us into his greatest life. Every boundary that he sets is there for our blessing, not our burden. And as we learn to trust him, even as we struggle to obey, there is grace and forgiveness, but always a clear direction of the best path. So may we seek that with all of our hearts. Will you stand with me? Will you pray? Heavenly Father.